Welcome. Tonight our journey begins in the cold. Not the cold you feel when you step outside on a winter morning, not the cold of a freezer or a mountain summit, but a different kind of cold entirely. A cold that is alive with possibility. A cold that, against every instinct you have, does not shrink life down. It makes life enormous. We are standing at the edge of the Southern Ocean. This is the ring of water that circles Antarctica, unbroken by any continent, uninterrupted by any landmass. It is the loneliest stretch of ocean on the planet. The wind here has been blowing since before recorded history, circling the bottom of the earth in an endless howl that sailors once called the Roaring Forties and the Furious Fifties. The water temperature hovers near minus 1.8 degrees Celsius. That is below the freezing point of fresh water. The only reason this ocean remains liquid is because the salt dissolved in it depresses the freezing point just enough to keep it moving, churning, breathing. And it is breathing. That is the word. The Southern Ocean breathes. It inhales cold air from the polar cap, and as it does, something remarkable happens. The cold water absorbs oxygen from the atmosphere with a greed that warm water cannot match. Cold water is dense, cold water is heavy, and cold water holds dissolved gas the way a sponge holds liquid. The colder the water, the more oxygen it can carry. This is not a metaphor, it is chemistry. It is one of the most fundamental properties of the physical world, and it is the invisible key to everything we are about to discover. Because in this water, in this freezing oxygen-saturated darkness, life has done something that it has not done anywhere else on Earth. It has grown to sizes that seem impossible. It has broken the rules that govern the rest of the animal kingdom. It has produced creatures so large, so slow, and so ancient that they make the giants of the land look like children. Tonight, we are diving into that cold. We are following the oxygen down. We are tracing the invisible thread that connects temperature to breath, and breath to size, and size to time. We're going to meet animals that have been alive for centuries, animals with eyes the size of dinner plates, animals whose legs span the width of a human face, animals that drift through the darkness on metabolism so slow they border on suspended animation. We are going to ask a question that scientists have been arguing about for more than 100 years. Why does cold water make animals huge? The answer, as we will discover, is not simple. It is not a single mechanism, a single gene, a single trick of evolution. It is a conspiracy of physics. It is a collaboration between temperature, oxygen pressure, food scarcity, and the patient grinding mathematics of deep time. It is a story that begins at the surface of the sea and descends, layer by layer, into a world that most humans will never see. A world where the sun is a memory, where the pressure would crush a submarine, and where the creatures have had millions of years to adapt to conditions that would kill you in minutes. But before we descend, before we leave the light behind, let us take a moment to prepare. Find a comfortable position. Let the weight of the day settle into the surface beneath you. If there is tension in your shoulders, in your jaw, in the muscles behind your eyes, let it loosen. We are not in a hurry. The deep ocean has been waiting for 4 billion years. It can wait a few more minutes for us. Dim the lights if you can. Let the room become a kind of darkness, not the absolute black of the abyss, but the soft, comfortable twilight of a room that is ready for sleep. The sound of my voice will be your guide. The science will be our map, and the cold, patient, oxygen-rich water of the Southern Ocean will be our destination. If there is noise around you, let it become the wind. The distant hum of a fan, the low murmur of a city at night, the creak of a building settling. Let these sounds become the weather of the open ocean, the background noise of a planet that is always moving, always churning, always breathing. None of it requires your attention. None of it is dangerous. It is simply the world, doing what the world does while you rest. Take a slow breath. Hold it for a moment. Feel the oxygen dissolving into your blood, crossing the thin membranes of your lungs, binding to the hemoglobin in your red blood cells, travelling to every tissue in your body. You are, right now, doing the same thing that the ocean does. You are absorbing oxygen. You are using it to fuel the quiet machinery of life. The difference is that you do it in warm air, at sea level, in a body that weighs perhaps 70 or 80 kilograms. The creatures we are about to meet do it in water that is barely above freezing, at pressures that would flatten your chest, in bodies that weigh half a ton. The same gas, the same chemistry, a radically different result. Now let us begin. The harbour fades behind us. The lights of the shore grow dim and then disappear. We are sailing south past the tip of South America, past the howling gap of the Drake Passage, into water that grows colder with every nautical mile. The colour of the sea changes. It was blue near the coast, then grey, then a deep dark green, and now, as we enter the polar waters, it becomes almost black. Not because the water is dirty, but because it is deep and cold and full of life that does not reflect light. It absorbs it. The air temperature drops. You can feel it on your skin, even in imagination, a sharpening, a tightening, as if the atmosphere itself is becoming denser, more serious. The clouds lower, the sky narrows. The horizon, which was wide and generous in the tropics, closes in around the ship like the walls of a corridor. The birds change too. The gulls and terns of the temperate coast have been replaced by albatrosses, enormous wandering albatrosses with wingspans of over 3 meters, gliding on the wind without a single flap, their bodies perfectly adapted to the endless gales of the Southern Ocean. They are the first giants we encounter, though they are giants of the air, not the water. They follow the ship for days, riding the updrafts off the swells, their dark eyes watching, their silence absolute. And then on the horizon the first ice. Not a sheet, not a wall, but scattered fragments, bergy pits, growlers, chunks of ancient compressed snow that have carved from the glaciers of Antarctica and drifted north on the current. They glow a pale, impossible blue, the blue of compressed air bubbles trapped in ice that is thousands of years old. They are beautiful and they are warnings. We are entering the cold. The wind sharpens, and somewhere beneath the hull of our imaginary vessel, far below the reach of the waves, the first giants are stirring. To understand them, to truly understand why they exist, we must first understand something about size itself. We must ask a question that seems simple, but is in fact one of the deepest puzzles in biology. Why is anything the size it is? A mouse is small, a whale is large. We accept this as obvious, as natural, as the way things are. But nature does not do anything without a reason. Every gram of tissue costs energy to build and to maintain. Every centimetre of body length requires more food, more oxygen, more structural support. Size is not free. It is an investment, and like all investments, it must pay a return. On land, the returns on size are governed by gravity. A land animal that grows too large collapses under its own weight. Its bones cannot support the mass. Its heart cannot pump blood to its extremities. This is why the largest land animal alive today, the African elephant, maxes out at roughly 6 or 7 tons. Beyond that, the physics of gravity and the engineering of bone and muscle simply cannot cope. But in the ocean, gravity is almost irrelevant. Water is dense, it supports the body. A creature in the sea is essentially weightless, floating in a medium that bears its mass for it. This is why the blue whale, the largest animal that has ever lived on this planet, larger than any dinosaur, can reach 30 meters in length and 180 tons. It is not fighting gravity. The water carries it. So the ocean removes one constraint. But removing a constraint does not explain why creatures actively grow larger. The absence of a ceiling does not explain why the building is tall. Something must be pushing life upward toward greater size. Something in the environment must be rewarding bigness, selecting for it, making it the winning strategy in the cold, dark lottery of deep-sea survival. That something, as we are about to discover, is woven into the very physics of cold water. It is a conspiracy between 3 ancient rules of biology, each one a piece of a puzzle that scientists have been assembling for nearly 2 centuries. and the first piece of that puzzle was laid down by a German biologist in the middle of the 19th century, in a world that had never seen the deep ocean floor. In 1847, a man named Carl Bergman sat in a university in Göttingen, Germany, and noticed a pattern. He was not an oceanographer. He was not a deep-sea explorer. He was a physiologist, a man who studied the mechanics of animal bodies, and he had been looking at something deceptively simple. He had been looking at the sizes of warm-blooded animals across different climates. What he found was a rule so elegant, so consistent, that it would bear his name for the next 2 centuries. Bergman noticed that within a given species, or among closely related species, the individuals living in colder climates tended to be larger than those living in warmer ones. Polar bears are larger than sun bears. Wolves in Alaska are larger than wolves in Mexico. Penguins near the pole are larger than penguins near the equator. The pattern repeated itself across mammals and birds, across continents, across ecosystems. It was not a subtle trend. It was a rule, and it held with a consistency that suggested something deep and fundamental about the relationship between temperature and body mass. The emperor penguin of Antarctica, standing over a metre tall and weighing up to 45 kilograms, is dramatically larger than the little blue penguin of temperate Australia, which barely reaches 30 centimetres. The musk ox of the Arctic tundra, built like a small truck, outweighs any tropical bovid of comparable lineage. Even within a single species, populations in colder regions trend larger. White-tailed deer in Canada are measurably bigger than white-tailed deer in Florida. The pattern is everywhere, once you know to look for it. The reason Bergman proposed is geometry, pure simple geometry. Consider a sphere. As a sphere grows larger, its volume increases much faster than its surface area. A ball with twice the diameter has 8 times the volume but only 4 times the surface area. This means that a larger body has proportionally less surface area exposed to the environment compared to the amount of warm tissue packed inside. This is sometimes called the square cube law, and it is one of the most powerful ideas in biology. It explains why elephants have proportionally smaller ears than mice. It explains why large animals can survive in environments that would kill small ones. And it explains with mathematical precision why cold environments consistently produce large bodies. Now think about what this means for an animal in cold water. Heat is lost through the surface, the skin, the outer membrane, the interface between the warm body and the cold environment. That is where the energy bleeds away. A small animal in freezing water is essentially a radiator. It has an enormous surface area relative to its tiny volume. It is losing heat faster than it can produce it. It is fighting a war it cannot win. But a large animal in the same water is a fortress. Its surface area is proportionally small compared to the vast warm interior of its body. It loses heat slowly. It retains energy efficiently. It can survive in the cold not because it is tougher, but because it is geometrically better suited to the problem. This is Bergman's rule, and it applies not just to the warm-blooded creatures Bergman originally studied. Over the following century, biologists discovered that the same pattern holds in cold-blooded marine animals. In the frigid waters of the deep sea and the polar oceans, invertebrates, crustaceans, mollusks, sea spiders, and isopods consistently reach larger sizes than their relatives in warmer, shallower water. Bergman's rule tells us that cold environments favour large bodies, but it does not tell us the whole story. It explains one advantage of being big in the cold, the conservation of heat, but it does not explain why a creature would invest the enormous energy required to build a large body in an environment where food is desperately scarce. To understand that, we need a second rule, and for this we must jump forward almost 100 years to the work of a Swiss biologist named Max Kleiber. In the 1930s, Kleiber was working at the University of California, studying the metabolic rates of animals. Metabolism is the sum total of all the chemical reactions happening inside a living body. It is the rate at which an animal burns fuel. It is the cost of being alive. Kleiber wanted to know how that cost scaled with body size. Did a large animal simply burn fuel in proportion to its mass? If an elephant weighed 1,000 times more than a rat, did it need 1,000 times more food? The answer was no, and the way the answer turned out to be no was deeply, almost suspiciously elegant. Kleiber discovered that an animal's metabolic rate does not scale linearly with its body mass. It scales to the 3/4 power. This is a mathematical relationship that means, in plain language, that bigger animals are more efficient. They get more life out of each calorie. A cat, which weighs roughly 100 times more than a mouse, does not have a metabolic rate 100 times greater. It has a metabolic rate roughly 32 times greater. The cat is, calorie for calorie, more efficient than the mouse. This is Kleiber's law, and its implications for the deep sea are profound. The deep ocean is a desert, not a desert of sand and heat, but a desert of food. The creatures that live on the abyssal plane, thousands of meters below the surface, exist in a world where almost nothing grows. There is no sunlight. There is no photosynthesis. There are no plants, no algae, no primary producers. The only food that reaches the deep is what falls from above. Dead plankton, fecal pellets, the occasional carcass of a whale or a fish. Scientists call this slow, sparse rain of organic matter marine snow. It is beautiful in the way that desolation can be beautiful. Tiny white flecks drifting through the beam of a submersible's light, sinking through thousands of meters of darkness, disintegrating as they fall. If you were to sit at the bottom of the ocean and watch the marine snow fall, you would need extraordinary patience. The flakes are small, often microscopic. They descend at a rate of roughly 100 to 200 meters per day. A piece of detritus that begins its journey at the sunlit surface might take 2 to 4 weeks to reach the abyssal floor, 4,000 meters below. And during that long, slow descent, it is being consumed. Bacteria colonize it. Small zooplankton pick at it. Gelatinous creatures engulf it. By the time a flake of marine snow reaches the bottom, it has been stripped of most of its energy. What arrives is a ghost of what departed, a caloric whisper. The total amount of organic carbon that reaches the deep sea floor is estimated at less than 5% of what is produced at the surface. In some of the most remote, oligotrophic regions of the ocean, far from the productive coastal upwelling zones, the figure is closer to 1%. The abyssal plain is, in caloric terms, one of the most impoverished habitats on Earth. There is less food per square meter on the deep ocean floor than in the Sahara Desert. By the time this snow reaches the abyssal floor, most of its energy has been consumed by the creatures in the layers above. What arrives at the bottom is a thin, unreliable trickle. It is not enough to sustain a large population. It is barely enough to sustain life at all, and yet life is there, and some of it is enormous. Kleiber's law explains why. In an environment where every calorie is precious, where the next meal might not arrive for weeks or months, metabolic efficiency is not a luxury. It is the difference between survival and starvation. A larger animal, burning fuel at a proportionally lower rate, can stretch each meal further. It can survive longer between feedings. It can store more energy in its tissues and deploy it more slowly. In the deep sea, being big is not wasteful. It is economical. It is the biological equivalent of driving a fuel-efficient car across a desert with no gas stations. This is the second piece of the puzzle. Bergman's rule tells us that cold favours the large because of heat retention. Kleiber's law tells us that scarcity favours the large because of metabolic efficiency. Together, they create a powerful selection pressure. In the cold food scarce deep ocean, the physics of heat loss and the mathematics of metabolism both point in the same direction. They both say grow. But there is a third rule, and this one comes not from physiology or metabolism, but from the strange biology of islands. In 1964, a biologist named J. Bristol Foster published a paper that would change the way we think about body size in isolated ecosystems. Foster had been studying the animals on islands, real islands, pieces of land surrounded by water, cut off from the mainland. And he noticed something peculiar. On islands, small animals tended to get bigger, and large animals tended to get smaller. This became known as the island rule. The Galapagos tortoise is a classic example. Its ancestors were ordinary-sized tortoises that arrived on the islands millions of years ago, probably rafting across the ocean on floating vegetation. On the mainland they were unremarkable, but on the islands, with few predators and limited resources, they evolved into giants. Their bodies expanded to store more energy, to travel further in search of food, to survive longer droughts. The isolation and the scarcity drove them toward size. The same pattern appears on island after island around the world. The Komodo dragon, the largest living lizard, evolved its massive size on the isolated islands of Indonesia. The now extinct Haast's eagle of New Zealand grew to enormous proportions in the absence of competing mammalian predators. The dodo of Mauritius, though it became famous for its extinction, was itself an example of island gigantism. A pigeon that grew to the size of a turkey in the predator-free isolation of its island home. Isolation, it seems, is a sculptor. Given enough time and enough freedom from competition, it carves life into larger forms. In 2006, a marine biologist named Craig McLean, now at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, took this idea and turned it on its side. He and his colleagues published a study that proposed something radical. The deep sea, they argued, is functionally an island. It is isolated from the surface ocean by thousands of meters of water. Its resources are limited, falling from above in that thin, unreliable snow. Its inhabitants diversified over millions of years from shallow water, ancestors that colonized the depths after mass extinction events, particularly during the Cenozoic era, when the deep ocean was repopulated following catastrophic die-offs that had emptied the abyss. In short, the deep sea is the largest island on Earth. It is an island made not of rock, but of darkness and pressure and cold, and like all islands, it has its own rules. The creatures that colonized it were small. They had to be. The journey from the productive shallows to the barren deep selected for organisms that could survive on very little. But once they arrived, once they had the abyss to themselves, the same pressures that made the Galapagos tortoise enormous began to work on them. Limited food favoured larger bodies that could store more energy. Few predators meant that large size carried less risk. Isolation meant that the evolutionary clock could tick for millions of years without interruption, slowly, steadily pushing body size upward. McLean's team compared the sizes of gastropods, the family of mollusks that include snails and slugs, across different depths. They found that the pattern held. Species in the deep ocean followed the island rule. Small-bodied lineages that colonized the depths evolved toward larger sizes over millions of years. This is the third piece of the puzzle. And now, if we assemble all three pieces, the picture begins to emerge. Bergmann's rule says cold favours the large because large bodies lose less heat. Kleiber's law says scarcity favours the large because large bodies are more metabolically efficient. The island rule says isolation favours the large because in a world without many predators and with unpredictable food, bigger animals can store more, travel further, and survive longer between meals. Three rules, three independent lines of evidence, and all three converge on the same conclusion. In the cold, deep, isolated ocean, the evolutionary pressure to grow large is not just present, it is overwhelming. It is a mathematical inevitability. Given enough time, given enough cold, given enough isolation, the creatures of the deep will grow, but there is something else, something that none of these three rules fully explains, something that has been dissolving quietly in the water this entire time, invisible, odorless, essential. It is the element that you are breathing right now. It is oxygen. And it may be the most important piece of the puzzle of all, because Bergmann's rule explains why large bodies retain heat. Kleiber's law explains why large bodies are efficient. The island rule explains why isolation selects for size, but none of them explain what physically allows a body to grow large in the first place. None of them explain what sets the upper limit on how big an animal can actually become. To understand that limit, we must look at the air itself, or rather, at the water. We must look at what the cold does to the oxygen dissolved in the sea, and we must understand a hypothesis that has consumed oceanographers and physiologists for decades, a hypothesis that is still being tested in the freezing waters of Antarctica right now. As we speak, it is called the oxygen temperature hypothesis, and it may be the key that unlocks the mystery of the giants. The idea begins with a simple observation, one so fundamental that it is taught in introductory chemistry courses around the world. Gas dissolves more readily in cold liquid than in warm liquid. You can see this in your kitchen. Open a cold bottle of soda and it fizzes gently. Open a warm bottle of soda and it erupts. The warm liquid cannot hold the dissolved carbon dioxide, so it releases it violently. The cold liquid grips the gas tightly, holding it in solution. The same principle applies to oxygen in seawater. Cold water absorbs more oxygen from the atmosphere than warm water does, and the Southern Ocean, the coldest, wildest, most wind-churned body of water on the planet, is among the most oxygen-saturated seas on Earth. The water around Antarctica is not just cold, it is drenched in oxygen. Now layer in a second fact. The animals that live in this cold water are cold-blooded. They are ectotherms. Their body temperature matches the temperature of the water around them, and when an ectotherm is cold, its metabolism slows. Its cells burn fuel at a reduced rate. Its chemical reactions proceed in slow motion. It needs less oxygen per minute to stay alive. Combine these two facts. The water is extraordinarily rich in oxygen, and the animals living in it need extraordinarily little oxygen to function. There is in effect a massive surplus, an oxygen budget with an enormous credit balance. The supply vastly exceeds the demand. And this surplus, this gap between what is available and what is needed, is the space in which giants can grow. In warmer water, an animal that tries to grow large quickly runs into a ceiling. Its cells multiply, its body expands, its oxygen demand increases. But the warm water around it cannot supply enough dissolved oxygen to feed all those new cells. The animal hits a physiological wall. It suffocates from within, not because there is no oxygen in the water, but because there is not enough for a body of that size. In cold water, that wall does not exist, or rather, it exists, but it is set so high that the animal can grow for years, for decades, for centuries before it ever comes close to reaching it. The oxygen is there, the demand is low. The body can expand, and expand, and expand, limited not by breath but by food and time and the slow, patient grinding of evolution. This is the oxygen temperature hypothesis. It was first articulated in its modern form in a 1999 paper by Gauthier Chapelle and Lloyd Peck, published in the journal Nature. They studied benthic amphipod crustaceans, small shrimp-like creatures that live on the sea floor across a wide range of latitudes and depths, and they found a direct correlation between the maximum body size of these animals and the dissolved oxygen levels in the water around them. Where the oxygen was high, the animals were large. Where the oxygen was low, the animals were small. The pattern was clean, consistent, and striking. It held across species, across oceans, across hemispheres. It was, the authors argued, evidence that oxygen availability is a primary constraint on body size in aquatic ectotherms, and that the relaxation of that constraint in cold, oxygen-rich polar waters is what allows polar and deep-sea organisms to reach their extraordinary sizes. But science requires more than correlation. It requires mechanism. It requires someone to go to the coldest place on Earth, to collect the actual giant creatures, and to test whether oxygen is truly the factor that allows them to be giants. And that is exactly what happened. In the freezing waters off McMurdo Station, Antarctica, at a latitude of 77 degrees south, where the water temperature sits at minus 1.8 degrees Celsius and the sea ice is meters thick, a team of researchers went looking for the truth inside the legs of giant sea spiders. McMurdo Station is one of the most remote research facilities on the planet. It sits on the southern tip of Ross Island, on volcanic rock surrounded by ice. To reach the seafloor, researchers must drill through the ice and send scuba divers down into water so cold that it would kill an unprotected human in minutes. The divers wear dry suits filled with insulating air. They carry lights into a darkness that is almost total, and when they reach the bottom, they find a world that looks like it belongs on another planet. The sea floor near McMurdo is carpeted with life. Sponges, sea stars, anemones, and strange, delicate organisms that seem to move in slow motion. And among them, stalking on impossibly long legs across the volcanic rock, are the sea spiders. Sea spiders, or pycnogonids, are not true spiders. They are marine chelicerates, ancient relatives of the arachnids, part of a lineage that has existed for hundreds of millions of years. In most of the world's oceans they are tiny, barely visible to the naked eye, with leg spans of a few millimeters, but in Antarctic waters they are giants. The species Colossendius megalonyx can reach a leg span of over 25 centimeters. Its body is so thin, so stretched, that it looks like a creature drawn by a child who forgot to add mass. It is all legs and proboscis, a walking stick of chitin navigating the cold dark floor. Art Woods, a professor at the University of Montana, and Amy Moran, a researcher at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, have spent years studying these creatures. They wanted to know why the Antarctic Sea spiders grow so large when their relatives elsewhere remain small, and they wanted to test the oxygen temperature hypothesis directly. Their experiments were elegant. They collected sea spiders of different sizes and exposed them to different conditions, varying the temperature and the dissolved oxygen content of the water. If the oxygen temperature hypothesis was correct, then larger sea spiders should struggle more in warm, oxygen-poor water than smaller ones. The big animals should be the first to suffer because their large bodies demand more oxygen, and the warm water cannot supply it. The results, published in 2019 in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B by Caitlin Shishido, a doctoral student at the University of Hawaii, along with Woods, Moran and their colleagues, were both illuminating and surprising. They found that all the sea spiders, large and small, were highly sensitive to elevated temperatures. Even modest warming caused measurable declines in their ability to function. These were creatures exquisitely adapted to the cold, and even a few degrees of warming disrupted their physiology. But here was the surprise. The researchers did not find that larger sea spiders were significantly more affected than smaller ones. According to the strictest reading of the oxygen temperature hypothesis, the giants should have been the first to fail. They should have hit the oxygen ceiling first, but they did not. Their performance declined at roughly the same rate as the smaller animals. This was a puzzle, and the answer to the puzzle turned out to be hiding in the animals' legs. When Shishido and Aaron To, an undergraduate student at the University of Hawaii, examined the sea spiders' exoskeletons under a microscope, they discovered something remarkable. The legs of the giant sea spiders were covered in pores, tiny holes in the chitin, and as the animals grew larger, these pores became bigger and more numerous. The exoskeletons of the largest specimens were, in Shishido's words, almost like Swiss cheese. These pores serve a critical function. Sea spiders do not have lungs. They do not have gills. They breathe directly through their exoskeletons, absorbing dissolved oxygen through their outer surface. As the animals grow larger, the distance that oxygen must travel from the surface to the innermost cells increases. This should create a problem. The bigger the animal, the harder it is for oxygen to reach the core. But the porous exoskeleton solves the problem. By becoming more holy as they grow, the sea spiders increase the surface area available for oxygen diffusion. They are, in effect, evolving their own breathing apparatus in real time, adjusting their body plan as they grow to ensure that oxygen can reach every cell. This is a beautiful piece of biology. It suggests that the sea spiders are not simply passive beneficiaries of cold, oxygen-rich water, They are actively engineering their bodies to exploit the oxygen surplus. They are building themselves to be giants. The researchers were careful to note that their results do not disprove the oxygen temperature hypothesis. They complicate it. The truth, they wrote, is likely more nuanced than any single hypothesis can capture. The oxygen is clearly important. The cold is clearly important. But the animals themselves are not standing still. They are adapting, compensating, innovating at the cellular level. The oxygen temperature hypothesis remains the most broadly accepted explanation for polar gigantism. The Polar TREC research program, which documents field expeditions to the Antarctic, describes it as the leading idea, but like all good science, it is still being tested, still being refined, still being argued about in journal papers and conference halls around the world. What we can say with confidence is this: the cold water of the polar oceans and the deep sea creates a unique set of conditions. The temperature is low, which slows metabolism and reduces oxygen demand. The oxygen concentration is high, which increases oxygen supply. The combination produces a surplus, a gap between supply and demand that allows animal bodies to expand beyond the limits imposed by warmer, less oxygenated water. This is the engine. This is the invisible force that has been sculpting life in the cold for millions of years. And now that we understand the engine, it is time to meet the machines it has built. It is time to descend into the gallery of giants. It is time to meet the creatures that have been growing slowly, patiently, silently in the darkness, while the rest of the world rushed forward in the light. Let us descend. The transition happens gradually, like falling asleep. You do not notice the exact moment the light disappears. One moment you can see the pale blue glow of the sky filtering through the water above. The next moment, there is only gradient, a slow dimming, blue fading to navy, navy fading to grey, grey fading to black. The temperature drops as we sink. At the surface, the water in the Southern Ocean might be a mere degree or two above freezing. At 500 meters, it is colder still, and the pressure is increased fivefold. At 1,000 meters, the sun is a distant memory. At 2,000 meters, the world is absolute, permanent night. The pressure here is extraordinary. At 4,000 meters, the depth of the average abyssal plain. The water exerts a force of roughly 400 atmospheres on every surface. That is 400 times the pressure you feel standing at sea level. A styrofoam cup lowered to this depth on a string would return crushed to the size of a thimble, its cellular structure compressed by the weight of the water above. But the creatures that live here do not feel this pressure, because they are mostly water themselves, and water is nearly incompressible. The pressure passes through them the way it passes through the ocean itself, unnoticed, irrelevant, just another constant of the deep. What matters is the cold, and the oxygen, and the darkness, and the food, or rather the absence of food. These are the 4 coordinates of the deep sea, the axis of the graph on which all abyssal life is plotted. And in this graph, in this particular combination of cold and oxygen and dark and hunger, the animals have found a solution that we have already predicted. They are large. We begin on the floor of the abyss, thousands of meters below the surface, where the water temperature sits just a few degrees above freezing and the pressure would crush a human ribcage. There is a creature that looks like it was designed by a nightmare. It has the body of a giant pillbug. It has compound eyes that glow in the lights of a submersible. It has 7 pairs of legs, each one ending in a claw that can grip the mud of the sea floor with mechanical precision. It is the giant isopod. Isopods are everywhere. They are one of the most successful groups of crustaceans on the planet. If you have ever turned over a rock in a garden and found a small grey armoured creature curling into a ball, you have met a terrestrial isopod, a woodlouse, a roly-poly. In the shallow ocean, marine isopods are common and unremarkable. They measure between 8 and 15 centimetres. They are part of the furniture of the sea floor, small scavengers that pick at the scraps of the benthic world. But in the deep, cold waters of the Atlantic, Pacific, and Arctic oceans, the isopod has become something else entirely. The species Bathynomus giganteus can reach a length of 76 centimetres, nearly 2.5 feet, and a weight of 1.7 kilograms. It is the size of a football. It is armoured in overlapping plates of chitine that make it look like a medieval war machine shrunk to the scale of a crustacean, and then enlarged again by some dark magic of the deep. The giant isopod is a scavenger. It eats whatever falls from above: whale carcasses, dead fish, the occasional squid. When food is abundant, it gorges. When food is scarce, it waits, and it can wait for an extraordinarily long time. In captivity, a giant isopod at the Toba Aquarium in Japan was observed to go more than 5 years without eating a single morsel of food. 5 years. The aquarium staff offered it food regularly. It refused. Week after week, month after month, year after year, the isopod simply sat on the bottom of its tank, motionless, its systems running on whatever reserves it had accumulated from its last meal. When it finally died, in February 2014, it had become a minor celebrity in Japan. Its stubborn fast a source of national fascination, 5 years without food. In the warm-blooded world, this is unthinkable. A human would die in roughly 2 months without food, a dog in perhaps 3 weeks. Even a hibernating bear, which can go 6 or 7 months without eating, is burning fat at a rate that would be profligate by the isopod standards. The giant isopod's metabolism, slow to a crawl by the cold temperatures it is adapted to, allowed it to survive on whatever reserves it had stored in its tissues, deploying energy so sparingly that the distinction between alive and asleep became almost philosophical. This is Kleiber's law made flesh. This is what metabolic efficiency looks like when it is pushed to its extreme by the cold and the dark and the scarcity of the deep ocean. The giant isopod does not need to eat often, because its large body burns fuel so slowly that each meal lasts for months or years. It is a biological battery, charged infrequently and discharged at a rate that would be imperceptible to the warm-blooded world above. The isopod's eyes are another adaptation to its world. They are compound eyes, like those of an insect, but they are enormous relative to the animal's body, reflecting the near-total darkness of the deep-sea floor. Each eye contains roughly 3,500 individual facets, each one capable of gathering the faintest traces of light. In the pitch blackness of the abyss, where the only illumination comes from the ghostly flicker of bioluminescent organisms, these eyes are the isopod's primary connection to the world around it. They can detect the faint glow of a whale carcass being colonized by luminescent bacteria, a beacon that signals food in the desert. And there is something almost meditative about this creature. It does not hunt, it does not chase. It sits on the abyssal plain, motionless, patient, its compound eyes scanning the darkness for the slow drift of a falling carcass. When one arrives, it moves with a deliberate, unhurried purpose, walking across the mud on its many legs, its claws clicking softly against the sediment. It feeds, it stores, and then it returns to its vigil, waiting. If you are listening in the dark right now, half asleep, let the image of the giant isopod settle in your mind. It is not a frightening creature. It is a patient one. It has found a way to live in a world of almost nothing, not by rushing, not by competing, but by slowing down until the cost of being alive is barely distinguishable from the cost of being still. Now let us rise from the abyssal floor. Let us ascend through the water column, up through the bathypelagic zone, the midnight zone, where the last traces of sunlight vanished long ago, and into the mesopelagic, the twilight zone, where the darkness is not absolute but diffuse, a perpetual grey dusk illuminated only by the cold blue flicker of bioluminescence. Here, in the cold waters of the Southern Ocean, at depths ranging from 1,000 to 2,000 meters, lives the largest invertebrate on the planet, not the largest fish, not the largest mammal, the largest animal without a backbone. It is the colossal squid. The colossal squid is not the giant squid. This distinction matters, and it is worth a moment of our time. The giant squid, Architeuthis dux, is the more famous of the two, the one that has haunted the imaginations of sailors and writers for centuries, the creature that inspired the kraken of Norse mythology and the monstrous tentacles in the pages of Jules Verne. The giant squid is long and slender. It can reach total lengths of 12 to 13 meters, with much of that length accounted for by its two extraordinarily long feeding tentacles. It lives in the temperate deep waters around the world. The colossal squid, Mesonicoteuthis hamiltoni, is different. It is shorter than the giant squid in total length, but it is far more massive. Its body is thick, stocky, compact, built like a wrestler rather than a swimmer. It lives almost exclusively in the cold waters surrounding Antarctica, in the circumpolar current of the Southern Ocean, and it is, by mass, the largest invertebrate that has ever been reliably measured. The largest intact specimen of a colossal squid was captured in the Ross Sea in February 2007 by a New Zealand fishing vessel, the San Aspiring, while it was fishing for Antarctic toothfish. The squid was hauled to the surface, barely alive, still clinging to a hooked toothfish. Its captain, John Bennett, later described it simply as a big bulk in the water. It was transported to the Museum of New Zealand Te Papa Tongarewa in Wellington, where it was preserved in ice for 8 months before being thawed and examined by a team of squid scientists. The specimen weighed 495 kilograms, roughly 1,000 pounds. Its mantle, the main body, was over 2 meters long. Its arms and tentacles, when extended, brought the total length to over 4 meters. But the most extraordinary feature was its eyes. The colossal squid has the largest eyes of any animal alive. The preserved specimen's eyes measured approximately 27 centimeters across, nearly 11 inches, roughly the diameter of a large dinner plate. These eyes are not for show. They are engineering marvels, evolved for a single purpose, to detect the faintest traces of light in the near-total darkness of the deep southern ocean. At depths of 1,000 meters and more, the only light is bioluminescence, the chemical glow produced by other organisms. The colossal squid's enormous eyes are optimized to catch this glow, to detect the faint spark of a passing lanternfish or the shimmer of a frightened shrimp. They are telescopes designed for the abyss. Scientists believe that the squid's eyes may also serve a defensive function. At those depths, the most dangerous predator is the sperm whale, Physeter macrocephalus, the largest toothed predator on Earth. Sperm whales dive to extraordinary depths to hunt squid, plunging over 1,000 meters into the darkness on a single breath of air. When a sperm whale descends, it does not use echolocation passively. It produces some of the loudest sounds in the animal kingdom, focused clicks that travel through the water at over 1,500 meters per second. These clicks bounce off objects and return, painting a sonic picture of the deep. The colossal squid cannot outrun a sperm whale, but with its enormous eyes, it may be able to detect the whale's bioluminescent wake, the faint glow of displaced plankton disturbed by the whale's approach from a distance of over 100 meters. Those eyes may buy the squid just enough warning to begin an evasive maneuver. When escape fails, the encounters are violent. Sperm whales that are killed or stranded are often found with circular scars on their skin, rings of scar tissue left by the rotating hooks on the colossal squid's tentacles. Some whales carry dozens of these scars, evidence of repeated battles in the deep darkness. The beaks of colossal squid, which are made of chitin and do not digest easily, are routinely found in sperm whale stomachs, confirming that the whale is a primary predator. One study found that colossal squid remains made up approximately 14% of the squid beaks found in sperm whale stomachs in the Antarctic. But because of the squid's enormous mass, this represented roughly 77% of the total biomass consumed, and the squid's arms are armed. not just with the sucker discs that characterize most squids, but with sharp rotating hooks, articulated barbs that can swivel independently, locking onto prey or attacker with mechanical force. Each hook sits in a fleshy socket and can rotate through a full range of motion, allowing the squid to grip slippery prey, or when threatened, to anchor itself to the body of a predator. These are not the passive adhesive cups of a common squid. They are weapons designed for the cold, dark battlefield of the deep southern ocean. But here is the detail that connects this creature to everything we have discussed tonight. Despite its terrifying anatomy, despite its massive size and its nightmare armament, the colossal squid is a creature of profound stillness. Research suggests that a 500 kilogram adult needs only about 30 grams of food per day, 1 ounce, for a creature that weighs half a ton. Think about that. A 1,000-pound animal surviving on the caloric equivalent of a single bite. This is the cold doing its work. The colossal squid lives in water that hovers near freezing. Its metabolism is slow to a glacial pace. It does not chase its prey through the water the way a barracuda or a tuna does. It drifts. It hovers. It uses its near-neutral buoyancy, achieved through specialized low-density body fluids, rich in ammonium, to hang suspended in the water column, expending almost no energy, its enormous eyes scanning the darkness for the telltale glow of a meal. When prey appears, the squid strikes. The tentacles, normally hidden, deploy with speed. The hooks lock on. The powerful beak, the largest of any squid, capable of snapping the backbone of a toothfish, makes short work of the catch, and then the squid returns to its vigil, drifting, waiting, its metabolism ticking over at a rate so slow it barely registers as alive. The colossal squid is a monument to the physics of cold water. Its enormous body is made possible by the oxygen surplus. Its enormous eyes are made necessary by the darkness. Its enormous patience is made inevitable by the metabolic slowdown of near-freezing temperatures. It is, in every way, a creature shaped by the cold, designed by the cold, sustained by the cold. Let us leave the twilight zone now. Let us travel north, out of the southern ocean, into the cold, deep waters of the North Atlantic and the Arctic. We are looking for an animal that makes the colossal squid look young, an animal so ancient, so slow, so profoundly shaped by cold water that it has been alive since before the scientific revolution. We are looking for the Greenland shark. The Greenland shark, Somniosus microcephalus, is not a creature that inspires immediate awe. It does not have the sleek, terrifying profile of a great white. It does not have the speed of a mako or the acrobatic grace of a thresher. It is, by shark standards, profoundly unremarkable in appearance. It is grey. It is thick. It has a rounded snout and small, almost useless eyes, many of which are damaged by a parasitic crustacean called Omatocoita elongata that latches onto the cornea and slowly clouds the shark's vision over the decades. Its scientific name translates roughly to sleepy small head. Its top speed has been measured at less than 2.9 kilometers per hour, slower than a brisk human walk. It moves through the Arctic darkness with the urgency of a drifting log. It is, in almost every measurable way, the most languid vertebrate on the planet, and it is the longest-lived vertebrate on Earth. In 2016, a team led by marine biologist Julius Nielsen, then a graduate student at the University of Copenhagen, published a paper in the journal Science that stunned the world. Nielsen and his colleagues had found a way to determine the age of Greenland sharks, a species that lacks the hard tissues, the fin spines and calcified vertebrae that scientists use to age other sharks. They could not count growth rings because the Greenland shark has no hard rings to count. Instead, they turn to the eye. Specifically, they turn to the eye. Specifically, they turn to the crystalline proteins in the nucleus of the shark's eye lens. These proteins are formed when the shark is an embryo, in the earlier stages of development, and they do not change after that. They are a chemical time capsule, locked in place at the moment of the shark's birth. Nielsen's team used radiocarbon dating on these proteins. They measured the ratio of carbon-14, a heavy isotope, to normal carbon-12, and they used a clever trick. In the mid-1950s, the atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons released a massive pulse of carbon-14 into the atmosphere. This pulse, known as the bomb pulse, was absorbed by the oceans and incorporated into the tissues of every living thing on Earth. By measuring the carbon-14 levels in the eye lenses of Greenland sharks, the researchers could determine whether the shark was born before or after the bomb pulse, giving them a rough but powerful calibration point. The results were extraordinary. The oldest shark in their sample was estimated to be approximately 392 years old, with an uncertainty range of plus or minus 120 years. Even at the lower end of that estimate, this single animal had been alive for more than 270 years. At the upper end, it had been swimming the Arctic since the early 1500s. Let that settle for a moment. There may be a Greenland shark alive right now, gliding through the black water beneath the Arctic ice, that was born before Shakespeare wrote his plays, before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock, before the telescope was invented. This animal has been alive through the entire span of modern history, growing at a rate of roughly 1 centimetre per year, inching its way toward its full size of up to 6.4 metres and over 1,000 kilograms, its metabolism ticking over so slowly that its body barely ages. Think about what this shark has outlived. If the oldest specimen was born around the year 1620, as the lower range of the estimate suggests, then it was already swimming in the Arctic when Galileo was placed under house arrest for suggesting the Earth moved around the Sun. It was a juvenile, perhaps 2 meters long, when Isaac Newton published the Principia Mathematica. It was approaching sexual maturity, perhaps 150 years old, when the French Revolution swept through Europe and the guillotine rose and fell in Paris. It was a mature adult when Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859. It survived both world wars. It was growing, 1 centimetre per year, when the first atomic bomb was detonated in the New Mexico desert. It was still growing when humans walked on the moon. It is still growing now. All of human modernity, every invention, every war, every revolution, every scientific breakthrough that separates us from the medieval world, fits within the lifespan of a single fish. This is not a metaphor. It is a measured, published, peer-reviewed, biological fact. Nielsen's team estimated that Greenland sharks do not reach sexual maturity until they are approximately 150 years old. Consider the implications of that number. A Greenland shark born today will not be ready to reproduce until the year 2176. It will outlive every human alive on this planet right now. Its grandchildren might not be born until the year 2500. The timescale of its reproduction is not biological in the human sense. It is geological. It operates on the same clock as glaciers and tectonic plates, and this extreme longevity makes the Greenland shark uniquely vulnerable to human activity. A species that takes 150 years to reach reproductive age cannot recover quickly from population decline. If a fishing trawler accidentally kills a sexually mature female, it has removed an animal that took 1.5 centuries to produce. Replacing her will take another 1.5 centuries. The arithmetic of conservation for this species is staggering. Every individual matters on a timescale that dwarfs human planning horizons. This longevity is not an accident. It is a direct product of the cold. The Greenland shark's tissues contain high levels of trimethylamine oxide, a compound that acts as a natural antifreeze, preventing ice crystals from forming in its cells. Its metabolism is among the slowest ever measured in a vertebrate. Its body temperature matches the near-freezing water around it. Every chemical reaction in its body proceeds at a pace that would be agonizing by mammalian standards. And in 2024, a team led by Dr. Arne Salm at Ruhr University Bochum in Germany sequenced the Greenland shark's genome. What they found was remarkable. The genome was enormous, twice the length of a human genome and the largest of any shark genome sequenced to date. It was a vast library of genetic code, and within it the researchers found something that no other shark possesses in such abundance: multiple copies of genes involved in DNA repair. In most animals, these repair genes exist in single copies. They do their work quietly, fixing the damage that accumulates in DNA over time, the chemical wear and tear of living. But in the Greenland shark, these genes have duplicated themselves, spreading through the genome like a maintenance crew that has tripled its workforce. The researchers found that transposable elements, sometimes called jumping genes, had distributed the DNA repair sequences throughout the genome, effectively seeding the shark's genetic code with repair stations. The effect, the researchers suggest, is that the Greenland shark can fix damaged DNA more efficiently than any other vertebrate studied to date. The constant low-level damage that accumulates in all living cells, the damage that, in you and me, eventually leads to aging and cancer, is repaired in the shark almost as fast as it occurs. The genome is not just large, it is resilient. It is self-healing. They also found an unusual abundance of genes related to a signaling pathway called NF-kappa B, which is involved in inflammation and immune response. Inflammation is one of the primary drivers of aging in mammals. It damages tissues, promotes cancer, and degrades organ function over decades. The Greenland shark appears to have evolved a more sophisticated system for managing this inflammation, keeping it in check over centuries rather than decades. The researchers also identified an altered version of the TP53 gene, one of the most important tumour suppressor genes in the animal kingdom. In humans, TP53 is sometimes called the guardian of the genome. It detects damaged cells and triggers their destruction before they can become cancerous. The Greenland shark's version of this gene appears to be modified in ways that may enhance its cancer-fighting ability, though more research is needed to confirm this. The cold did not just slow this animal down, it gave it centuries. The slow metabolism, the reduced oxidative stress, the low rate of cellular turnover, all of these are gifts of the cold water. And over evolutionary time, the shark's genome has been shaped to exploit these gifts to their fullest extent. The Greenland shark is the ultimate expression of the principle we have been exploring tonight. Cold water slows metabolism. Slow metabolism reduces the need for oxygen and food. Reduced need allows the body to grow slowly, carefully, without the frantic expenditure of energy that characterizes warm-blooded life. And slow growth, stretched over centuries, produces an animal of extraordinary size and age. There are other giants in the cold ocean. The Japanese spider crab, Macrochaira kempferi, is the largest living arthropod on Earth. Its leg span can reach 3.7 meters, nearly 12 feet, from the tip of one outstretched claw to the tip of the opposite. If you stood one upright, it would tower over most adult humans. It is a creature that looks like it was designed for a science fiction film, all angular joints and impossibly long spindly legs radiating from a compact, triangular body covered in knobs and spines. The Japanese spider crab lives in the cold, deep waters off the Pacific coast of Japan, at depths ranging from 50 to 600 meters. The deeper populations inhabiting the colder water tend to be larger, a pattern that by now should feel familiar. Its preferred habitat is the dark, muddy seafloor of the continental shelf, where the temperature sits between 10 and 15 degrees Celsius in the shallows and drops toward near freezing at the deeper end of its range. Like the Greenland shark, the Japanese spider crab grows slowly. It molts its exoskeleton periodically, each molt allowing a slight increase in size, and the intervals between molts lengthen as the animal ages. Its lifespan is estimated at up to 100 years, though this is difficult to confirm because the animal lives far from easy observation. What we do know is that it is a scavenger and an omnivore, feeding on algae, mollusks, and the carcasses of other organisms that drift to the seafloor. It is not an active hunter. It is a patient, methodical gleaner of the bottom, using its long legs to cover wide areas of seafloor in search of whatever edible matter the currents have deposited. The spider crab's enormous leg span is not just for walking, it serves a thermoregulatory function. The long, thin legs provide a large surface area for gas exchange, allowing oxygen to diffuse across the exoskeleton in a manner similar to the Antarctic sea spiders. The cold water around the crab is rich in dissolved oxygen, and the slow metabolism of the animal in that cold water means that the oxygen delivery system, primitive as it is sufficient to sustain a body of extraordinary size. And then there are the giant tube worms. Riftia pachyptilla lives not in the cold of the abyss, but in one of the strangest environments on Earth, the hydrothermal vents of the mid-ocean ridges. Here, superheated water, rich in hydrogen sulfide and minerals, erupts from the seafloor at temperatures that can exceed 400 degrees Celsius. The water around the vents is warm, sometimes extremely so, but just a few meters away, it is the standard near freezing temperature of the deep ocean. The tube worms cluster around these vents in dense colonies, their white tubes rising from the rock like organ pipes, their bright red plumes extended into the warm, chemical-laden water. These plumes are not gills in the traditional sense. They are packed with hemoglobin, the same molecule that makes your blood red, and they are designed to absorb hydrogen sulfide from the vent water. Inside the worm's body, billions of symbiotic bacteria convert this hydrogen sulfide into energy through a process called chemosynthesis, a form of metabolism that runs not on sunlight, but on chemical energy from the earth itself. Tube worms can grow to over 2 meters in length, and they grow fast, sometimes adding over 80 centimeters in a single year, making them among the fastest growing marine invertebrates ever recorded. The gigantism is driven not by the cold water mechanism we have been discussing, but by an entirely different engine, the limitless chemical energy of the hydrothermal vent. They are included in our gallery, not because they follow the same rules as the cold water giants, but because they illustrate a broader principle. Gigantism in the ocean is not caused by any single factor. It is caused by the availability of energy and oxygen in whatever form the environment provides. In the cold abyss, that energy comes from metabolic efficiency and oxygen surplus. At the hydrothermal vents, it comes from the raw chemical power of the Earth's interior. The ocean, it seems, will grow giants wherever the physics allows. The cold is one path, the vents are another. Both lead to the same destination, bodies that are larger than anything the surface world can produce. Each of these creatures is a product of the same underlying physics. Each one has been shaped by its environment, cold water or chemical heat, dissolved oxygen or hydrogen sulfide, metabolic efficiency or symbiotic chemistry, into a form that is larger than its relatives in more moderate conditions. They are all variations on a single theme, a theme written in the language of thermodynamics and chemistry and time. But the gallery of giants is not limited to the modern ocean. There was a time, long before humans walked the earth, long before the oceans reached their current temperatures, when the principle of oxygen and size played out on a global scale. A time when the air itself was thick with oxygen, when the atmosphere was supercharged, and when the creatures that breathed it grew to sizes that would seem impossible today. To find this ancient gallery, we must leave the ocean entirely. We must travel back through deep time, past the age of mammals, past the extinction of the dinosaurs, past everything we think of as familiar, to a world that existed 300 million years ago. A world of swamps and darkness and coal. A world where the air was so rich in oxygen that it allowed insects, creatures constrained by the most limiting breathing system in the animal kingdom, to grow to the size of hawks. We are going to the Carboniferous. 300 million years ago, the Earth looked nothing like the planet you know. The continents were gathered into a single massive landmass that geologists call Pangaea. Surrounded by a global ocean, the interior of this supercontinent was arid and harsh, but the margins, the coastal lowlands where the sea met the land, were something else entirely. They were swamps. Vast, hot, humid, oxygen-drenched swamps that stretched for thousands of miles, carpeted with vegetation so dense and so prolific that it would eventually be compressed into the coal deposits that power our civilization today. This is why we call this era the Carboniferous, the carbon-bearing period. The coal beneath our feet is the fossilized memory of these ancient forests. If you could stand in one of these forests, the world would feel alien. The air would be thick, warm, and impossibly humid. The canopy above would be formed not by oaks or pines, but by towering lycopod trees, lepidodendron and sigillaria, rising 30 meters or more on thick scaly trunks. Their bark had a distinctive diamond pattern, like the skin of a reptile blown up to the scale of a building. Beneath them the ground would be spongy, waterlogged, dense with decaying vegetation that never fully decomposed. The smell would be earthy, rich, almost sweet. The scent of organic matter slowly being crushed into coal, and the sound would be wrong. There would be no bird song because birds did not yet exist. There would be no buzzing of bees because bees had not yet evolved. But there would be a hum, a deep constant vibration in the air, the sound of wings, enormous wings. The sky of the Carboniferous was an insect sky, and the insects that filled it were creatures that would not fit in your hand. The trees of the Carboniferous were not like modern trees. They were lycopods and ferns and horsetails, primitive plants that had only recently evolved the ability to produce wood and lignin, the tough structural molecules that allow a plant to stand tall. And because they had only recently evolved linen, the bacteria and fungi of the Carboniferous had not yet evolved the ability to break it down. When these trees fell, they did not rot, they accumulated. Layer upon layer, century upon century, the dead wood piled up in the waterlogged swamps, burying carbon, removing it from the atmosphere. And this burial of carbon had a consequence that would reshape the entire planet. As the carbon was locked away in the swamps, the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere fell, and as the CO2 fell, the concentration of oxygen rose. Because plants were photosynthesizing furiously, pulling carbon out of the air and releasing oxygen, and because the dead plant matter was not decomposing and releasing that carbon back, the atmospheric oxygen climbed higher and higher. During the peak of the Carboniferous, oxygen levels in the atmosphere reached approximately 35%. Today the atmosphere contains about 21% oxygen. The Carboniferous air was nearly 70% richer in oxygen than the air you are breathing right now. If you could travel back in time and take a single breath of Carboniferous air, you would feel a rush of energy, a brightness, a hyper-awareness, as if someone had turned up the contrast on the entire world. And in this oxygen-rich air, something extraordinary happened. The insects grew. Insects breathe differently from every other group of animals on the planet. They do not have lungs. They do not have blood that carries oxygen, at least not in the way that vertebrates do. Instead, they have a system of tiny tubes called tracheae that branch from openings in their exoskeleton called spiracles and ramify inward, dividing and subdividing until they reach every cell in the body. Oxygen travels directly from the atmosphere through these tubes to the tissues. It is a system of direct delivery, bypassing the need for a circulatory system to transport oxygen. This system is efficient for small bodies. For an ant or a fly or a beetle, the tracheal tubes are short enough that oxygen can diffuse from the spiracles to the innermost cells without difficulty. But there is a catch. Diffusion is slow. It works well over short distances, but it becomes increasingly inadequate as the distances grow. For a large insect, the tracheal tubes would need to be so long and the distances so great that oxygen could not reach the core of the body fast enough to sustain life. This is the oxygen ceiling for insects. It is a hard physical limit, set by the laws of diffusion, and in the modern atmosphere, with 21% oxygen, it constrains insects to relatively small sizes. The largest living insect, the Atlas moth, has a wingspan of about 25 centimetres, roughly 10 inches. The largest beetle weighs about 100 grams. These are the outer boundaries of insect size in a 21% oxygen world. But in a 35% oxygen world, the ceiling lifts. With more oxygen in each breath of air, the tracheal tubes can deliver adequate oxygen over longer distances. The diffusion gradient is steeper. The delivery system works better, and the insects can grow. And grow they did. The most iconic creature of the Carboniferous sky was Meganeura, a predatory insect closely related to modern dragonflies, though technically it belonged to a more primitive group that scientists now call griffinflies, or Meganisoptera. Meganeura had a wingspan of approximately 65 to 75 centimetres, nearly 2.5 feet. It was the size of a hawk. Its single wing could reach 32 centimetres in length. An engineering analysis estimated that the largest specimens weighed between 100 and 150 grams. Meganeura was a predator. It had enormous compound eyes that gave it nearly panoramic vision. It had powerful mandibles designed for catching and consuming other insects. Its legs were equipped with spines, forming a kind of aerial basket, a flying trap that could snatch prey from the air. It was the apex predator of the Carboniferous sky, ruling an airspace that no vertebrate had yet learned to enter. There were no birds, there were no bats, there were no pterosaurs. The sky belonged to the insects, and Meganeura was their monarch. Its fossils were first discovered in the coal measures of Commentry in southeastern France in 1880. The French paleontologist Charles Brongniart described and named the genus in 1885, calling it Meganeura, meaning large-veined, a reference to the dense network of veins that reinforced its enormous wings. In 1979, another beautifully preserved specimen was unearthed in the coal seams beneath the small mining town of Bolsover in Derbyshire, England, 500 metres underground. The miners who found it were, by all accounts, astonished. It was a dragonfly the size of a seagull, entombed in rock that was 300 million years old. The discovery of these fossils immediately raised a question that would echo through a century of scientific debate. How? How could an insect grow this large? The French scientists Halley and Halley proposed in 1911 that the answer was the atmosphere. They argued that Meganeura could only have flown in an atmosphere denser and richer in oxygen than our own. Their hypothesis was dismissed by the scientific establishment for decades. The prevailing view was that the oxygen content of the ancient atmosphere was essentially the same as today's, and that giant insects were simply a mystery without a satisfying explanation. But the hypothesis refused to die. In the early 2000s, a team led by paleobiologist John Vandenbrooks at Arizona State University devised a remarkable experiment. They raised living dragonflies in sealed chambers with different atmospheric compositions. One chamber mimicked Carboniferous conditions with oxygen levels at approximately 31%. Another chamber had modern oxygen levels of 21%. A third had reduced oxygen levels of just 12%, simulating the low oxygen conditions thought to have existed at other points in Earth's history. The results, presented at the annual conference of the Geological Society of America, were striking. The dragonflies raised in the high oxygen chamber grew 15% larger than those raised in normal air. Their growth rate was faster, their metabolic efficiency was higher, and their wings were larger. The dragonflies in the low oxygen chamber grew more slowly and remained smaller. The cockroaches in the experiment, interestingly, showed less variation, suggesting that the oxygen-size relationship is not uniform across all insect groups. This was, for many scientists, the confirmation they had been waiting for. The laboratory had reproduced, in miniature, the conditions that had created the giants of the Carboniferous. High oxygen meant large insects. Low oxygen meant small insects. The relationship was real, measurable, and repeatable. But Meganeura was not alone. The Carboniferous was an age of giants across the entire arthropod world. On the forest floor, beneath the canopy of lycopod trees, in the perpetual damp warmth of the coal swamps, there moved a creature that would make any modern entomophobe faint on the spot. Arthropleura was a millipede-like creature, though calling it a millipede is like calling a great white shark a fish. It is technically accurate and entirely inadequate. Arthropleura reached lengths of up to 2.6 meters, over 8 feet, making it the largest known land invertebrate in the entire history of the planet. Not the largest that is alive today, the largest that has ever lived. Its fossilized trackways, preserved in sandstone, show the parallel grooves of dozens of legs propelling a body wider than a human torso through the undergrowth. Imagine encountering this creature. You are walking through a carboniferous swamp. The air is thick with moisture and oxygen. The light is dim, filtered through a dense canopy of giant ferns and lycopods. The ground is soft, saturated, covered in a mat of decaying vegetation that gives slightly under your weight. And then you hear it, a rustling, a dry clicking sound like 100 tiny claws scraping against bark. You look down and see, emerging from behind a fallen log, a segmented body as long as a small car, armoured in overlapping plates of dark chitin, moving on a wave of legs with a sinuous flowing motion that is equal parts hypnotic and horrifying. Arthropleura was probably not a predator. Analysis of its gut contents and coprolites, fossilized feces, suggests it was an herbivore or a detritivore, feeding on the rotting vegetation of the swamp floor. It was essentially a giant recycling machine, processing the endless supply of dead plant matter that the carboniferous forest produced. Its enormous size was not for hunting. It was for efficiency, for defense, and for the simple thermodynamic advantage of being large in an oxygen-rich world. Pulmonoscorpius, an early scorpion, grew to lengths of over 70 centimeters, more than 2 feet. Its pedipalps, the large pincers at the front of its body, were proportionally massive, capable of gripping and crushing prey with a force that modern scorpions cannot approach. Its tail, tipped with a stinger that may or may not have been venomous, arched over its back in the classic scorpion posture, though at this size, the posture was considerably less quaint and considerably more threatening. Pulmonoscorpius was a predator of the leaf litter, an ambush hunter that waited in the shadows of the swamp for smaller arthropods to wander within range. Even the cockroaches of the Carboniferous were larger than their modern descendants. Some species reached lengths of 9 centimeters, and their wings, preserved as delicate impressions in the coal measures, show a level of structural complexity that suggests powerful sustained flight. The mayflies had wingspans approaching 0.5 meter. The landscape was alive with arthropods of a scale that the modern world has simply never seen, and all of them, every giant of the Carboniferous, owed their existence to the same molecule that sustains the giants of the modern cold ocean: oxygen. The atmosphere had 35% of it. The tracheal tubes could deliver it over longer distances. The metabolic furnaces of these enormous bodies could burn it efficiently. The ceiling on size had been lifted and life had surged upward to fill the space. It was a world built on breath. And when the breath changed, the world collapsed. The connection between this ancient gigantism and the modern giants of the cold ocean is the same molecule: oxygen. In the Carboniferous, the oxygen was in the air, and the insects grew because their tracheal breathing system could deliver more of it over longer distances. In the modern ocean, the oxygen is dissolved in cold water, and the marine invertebrates grow because their cells can access more of it in an environment where their metabolic demand is low. The principle is identical. Oxygen sets the ceiling on body size. Where oxygen is abundant, the ceiling lifts, and life expands to fill the space. Where oxygen is scarce, the ceiling drops, and life is compressed back into smallness. This is one of the deepest patterns in the history of life on Earth. It has been operating for at least 500 million years. It shaped the Carboniferous. It shapes the modern deep sea. It shaped the periods in between, the Permian, when oxygen fell and giants died, the Cretaceous, when the oceans were warm and the deep sea fauna was small, and the Cenozoic when the Antarctic ice sheet formed. The oceans cooled, the oxygen levels in polar water surged, and the modern generation of cold water giants began their long, slow growth. And there is a sobering corollary to this story. Just as high oxygen created the giants, falling oxygen destroyed them. At the end of the Permian period, roughly 252 million years ago, the Earth experienced the most devastating mass extinction in its history. The Great Dying. Over 90% of all marine species and roughly 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species vanished. The causes are complex and debated, but they are thought to involve massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia, the Siberian traps, which released enormous quantities of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. The greenhouse effect warmed the planet. The warming oceans lost their dissolved oxygen. The thermohaline circulation, the great conveyor belt that delivers oxygen to the deep, slowed and possibly stopped. The deep ocean became a suffocating wasteland, devoid of the oxygen that had sustained its inhabitants. The marine organisms died first and fastest. The trilobites, which had survived for 300 million years, vanished entirely. The reef-building organisms collapsed. The seafloor communities, dependent on the oxygen delivered by cold, sinking polar water, were obliterated. It was not a meteor that killed them. It was not a predator. It was the slow, silent withdrawal of a gas they could not live without. And with the atmospheric oxygen also in decline, the giants of the land suffered in parallel. The griffin flies disappeared. The giant millipedes vanished. The enormous scorpions and cockroaches shrank or died out. The tracheal breathing system, which had been the key to their gigantism, became their prison. In an atmosphere with less oxygen, the tubes could no longer deliver enough gas to support massive bodies. The ceiling crashed down and the insects were forced back into smallness. They have never recovered. No insect in the last 250 million years has approached the sizes achieved during the Carboniferous. This ancient story is not just a curiosity, it is a warning. It tells us that the relationship between oxygen and size is not academic. It is not a footnote in a biology textbook. It is a dynamic, active force that has shaped the history of life on this planet for hundreds of millions of years. When oxygen is abundant, life grows. When oxygen diminishes, life contracts. The pattern has repeated itself over and over across geological time with a consistency that should give us pause. And that brings us inevitably to the present, to a planet where the oceans are warming, where the dissolved oxygen in the water is changing, where the very conditions that created the modern giants of the deep sea are beginning to shift. We must now ask the question that sits at the heart of this story, the question that marine biologists and climate scientists are asking right now, in laboratories and on research vessels and in the freezing waters of Antarctica. If cold, oxygen-rich water made the animals huge, what happens when the water warms up? What happens when the oxygen starts to leave? Are the giants disappearing? The answer, as you might expect from the ocean, is complicated. But the evidence is beginning to come in, and it is not entirely reassuring. The planet is warming. This is not speculation. It is measured. It is documented. It is the single most thoroughly observed trend in the history of environmental science. The concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has risen from roughly 280 parts per million in the pre-industrial era to over 420 parts per million today, a level not seen in at least 800,000 years. And this excess carbon dioxide is trapping heat, warming the atmosphere and, critically, warming the oceans. The oceans have absorbed more than 90% of the excess heat generated by greenhouse gas emissions. They have been acting as a thermal buffer, a planetary sponge, soaking up the energy that would otherwise have raised atmospheric temperatures even faster. But this absorption has a cost. The water is getting warmer, and warm water holds less dissolved oxygen. This is the same chemistry we discussed at the beginning of our journey, but now running in reverse. Cold water grips oxygen tightly, warm water releases it. As ocean temperatures rise, the dissolved oxygen content of the water declines. This process is called ocean deoxygenation, and it is already measurable. Over the past 50 years, global ocean oxygen levels have declined by roughly 2%. That number sounds small, but in the marginal sensitive ecosystems of the deep sea, where animals are adapted to stable conditions that have persisted for millennia, even small changes can have large consequences. There is another mechanism at work: the global ocean circulation, the great conveyor belt of water that carries heat from the tropics to the poles and cold. Oxygen-rich water from the poles to the deep is driven by temperature and salinity differences. Cold, salty water at the poles sinks, pulling warm surface water northward and driving the circulation. This thermohaline circulation is the lungs of the ocean. It is the mechanism by which oxygen reaches the deep. As the poles warm, the temperature difference between the tropics and the Arctic diminishes. The cold water at the poles becomes less cold, less dense, less willing to sink. The circulation weakens, and when the circulation weakens, less oxygen is delivered to the deep sea. The abyss begins to suffocate. This is not a hypothetical scenario. It has happened before. During the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, roughly 56 million years ago, a period of rapid global warming driven by a massive release of carbon into the atmosphere, ocean temperatures rose sharply. The thermohaline circulation slowed. The deep ocean became warmer and less oxygenated. The fossil record shows a corresponding decline in the body sizes of deep-sea organisms. The giants of that era shrank or disappeared. The implications for the modern giants are troubling. If the oxygen temperature hypothesis is correct, if the enormous size of deep-sea and polar organisms is sustained by the surplus of oxygen in cold water, then a reduction in that surplus should, over time, reduce the maximum body size that these ecosystems can support. The ceiling that was set so high by the cold and the oxygen would begin to lower. The giants, the isopods, the squid, the sea spiders would find themselves in a world that is slowly, gradually, becoming less hospitable to their enormous bodies. Camilo Mora, a researcher at the University of Hawaii, has studied the vulnerability of deep-sea species to climate change. He has pointed out that the animals of the deep ocean are adapted to extraordinary environmental stability. The temperature in the abyssal zone changes by fractions of a degree over centuries. These organisms have never experienced rapid warming. They may have no physiological capacity to adjust. They are specialists, tuned to a narrow band of conditions, and when those conditions shift even slightly, they may not be able to follow. Think about what this means for the Greenland shark, a creature that has been growing at 1 centimetre per year for potentially 400 years. It cannot accelerate its reproduction. It cannot migrate to colder water that may not exist in sufficient quantity. It cannot evolve its genome in time to meet a threat that is arriving over decades, not millennia. Its entire existence is predicated on the assumption that the Arctic will remain cold and the water will remain oxygen-rich. If that assumption fails, the shark has no plan B. It has only the plan that has worked for millions of years, the plan of patience and slowness, and that plan requires a stable ocean. The same is true for the colossal squid, lurking in the deep waters of the Southern Ocean, where the Antarctic circumpolar current has maintained relatively stable conditions for millions of years. The squid's biology, its glacial metabolism, its ambush predation strategy, its near-neutral buoyancy achieved through specialized body chemistry, all of these are finely tuned to a specific set of environmental parameters. Change the temperature by a few degrees, reduce the dissolved oxygen by a few percentage points, and the entire equation shifts. This is particularly concerning for the polar species, the creatures around Antarctica, the giant sea spiders, the enormous amphipods, the colossal squid, live in the coldest, most oxygen-rich water on the planet. They are at the extreme end of the spectrum. They have the most to lose. But there is nuance here, and scientific honesty demands that we acknowledge it. The 2019 research on Antarctic sea spiders by Shishido, Woods Moran, and their colleagues showed that these creatures may be more resilient than the oxygen temperature hypothesis predicts. The porous exoskeletons of the larger sea spiders appear to give them a physiological buffer, allowing them to compensate for changes in oxygen availability by increasing the surface area available for gas exchange. The researchers cautioned that their experiments were short-term and that the long-term effects of warming remain unknown, but they suggested that predicting winners and losers in the face of climate change requires a more nuanced, whole-organism approach. In other words, the giants may not all fall at the same rate. Some may have tricks, adaptations, escape hatches that allow them to persist in a warming world. Others may not. The Greenland shark, with its extraordinary genome full of DNA repair genes, may prove more resilient than expected. The colossal squid, adapted to the most specific and stable conditions in the Southern Ocean, may be among the most vulnerable. We do not yet know. The experiment is still running. The ocean is still warming, the oxygen is still declining, and the giants are still down there in the cold and the dark, growing and waiting and drifting, unaware that the conditions that made them possible are slowly, almost imperceptibly, beginning to change. The stakes are not merely aesthetic. The giants of the deep are not just curiosities, not just charismatic specimens for museum displays and nature documentaries. They are functional components of the deep-sea ecosystem. The giant isopods are scavengers, recyclers of the dead matter that reaches the seafloor. Without them, whale carcasses and other large falls would decompose more slowly, altering the chemistry of the sediment and the communities that depend on it. The colossal squid is a keystone predator in the Southern Ocean food web, connecting the mesopelagic fish populations to the great whales. Sperm whales dive 1,000 meters to feed on colossal squid, and those whales, when they return to the surface, fertilize the phytoplankton with their fecal plumes, driving the primary productivity that feeds the entire ocean. Remove the colossal squid, and the chain from deep predator to surface productivity loses a critical link. The Greenland shark, too, plays a role that is only beginning to be understood. As a top predator and scavenger in the Arctic, it helps regulate the populations of fish and marine mammals, and its consumption of carcasses prevents the build-up of dead organic matter on the seafloor. Its long lifespan means that each individual represents a repository of ecological memory, a living record of how Arctic food webs have functioned over centuries. Losing these animals is not just losing a species, it is losing a library. And the loss, if it comes, would be slow. That is the particular cruelty of the situation. The giants will not disappear in a dramatic visible crash. They will shrink, slowly, over generations that, for a Greenland shark, span centuries. The maximum body size will decrease by imperceptible increments. The colossal squid will grow slightly less colossal. The giant isopods will be slightly less giant. The sea spiders will have slightly shorter leg spans. And because these animals live in the most remote, least observed habitats on Earth, we may not even notice until the change is irreversible. This is the nature of slow catastrophe. It is invisible until it is complete. There is a deeper lesson here, one that extends beyond marine biology and into the way we think about the world. The story of cold water gigantism is a story about constraints and possibilities. It is about the way physical conditions set the boundaries of life, and the way life pushes against those boundaries, finding every possible space to expand into. In the warm, shallow ocean, the constraints are tight. Oxygen is limited. Metabolism is fast. Competition is fierce. The ceiling on body size is low, and life beneath that ceiling is frantic fast, colourful and short-lived. A tropical reef fish lives for a few years, maybe a decade. It is brilliant, vivid, rushing through its existence in a blaze of colour and motion. In the cold, deep ocean, the constraints are different. Oxygen is abundant, metabolism is slow, Competition is sparse, the ceiling on body size is high, and life beneath that ceiling is slow, patient, dark, and ancient. A Greenland shark lives for centuries. A giant isopod waits years between meals. A colossal squid drifts in the darkness, its body barely distinguishable from the water itself, its patience indistinguishable from the patience of the ocean. Neither world is better, neither is more alive. They are simply different expressions of the same physics, different solutions to the same fundamental problem of how to stay alive on a planet where energy is finite and conditions are variable. But there is something in the cold water solution that speaks to us if we are willing to listen. Something in the patience of the giant isopod, in the stillness of the colossal squid, in the centuries-long journey of the Greenland shark. These creatures have found a way to thrive not by doing more, but by doing less, not by growing fast, but by growing slowly, not by burning bright, but by burning low. Consider the Greenland shark once more. This animal was born perhaps in the year 1620. At that moment, the Pilgrims had not yet set foot in Massachusetts. Shakespeare had been dead for 4 years. Galileo was peering through his telescope at the moons of Jupiter. The shark, a tiny pup, barely a foot long, began its life in the cold darkness of the Arctic, and it began to grow, 1 centimetre per year. Invisible progress. The accumulation of millimetres into metres stretched across the entirety of modern human history, while empires rose and fell, while wars were fought, while continents were colonised and revolutions transformed the world. The shark was growing, 1 centimetre per year. It did not know about the printing press or the steam engine or the atomic bomb. It did not care about the Renaissance or the Enlightenment or the Industrial Revolution. It was simply following the instructions written in its genome by the cold, growing slowly, metabolizing slowly, aging slowly, in water that was always the same temperature, always the same darkness, always the same cold. There is a kind of wisdom in this, not the wisdom of intelligence or consciousness, but the wisdom of fit. The shark fits its environment the way a key fits a lock. Every aspect of its biology, its slow growth, its slow metabolism, its slow reproduction, its antifreeze proteins, its enormous genome packed with DNA repair genes, is a perfect match for the conditions of the Arctic deep. It is not trying to be anything other than what the cold water allows, and the cold water, in return, allows it to exist for centuries. We, by contrast, are creatures of speed and ambition. We burn fuel fast. We grow fast. We reproduce early. We age quickly. We have conquered the surface of the planet in the blink of a geological eye, reshaping the atmosphere, the oceans and the land surface in a few thousand years. We are, in the language of metabolic biology, hot-running machines, burning through our energy reserves at a rate that no cold water creature could comprehend. Our hearts beat roughly 60 to 100 times per minute. A Greenland shark's heart beats perhaps a handful of times. Our cells divide rapidly, renewing our skin every few weeks, our blood every few months. The shark's cells divide so slowly that the proteins in its islands, formed before birth, remain essentially unchanged for centuries. We measure our lives in decades. The shark measures its life, if it measures anything at all, in geological epochs. There is a concept in biology called the rate of living theory. It proposes in its simplest form that organisms have a fixed number of heartbeats, a finite metabolic budget, and that how quickly they spend that budget determines how long they live. A hummingbird, with a heart rate of over 1,000 beats per minute, burns through its budget in a few years. An elephant with a heart rate of 30 beats per minute stretches its budget over decades, and the Greenland shark, with a heart rate so slow it barely registers on our instruments, stretches its budget over centuries. The theory is oversimplified, and modern biology has moved beyond it in many ways. Longevity is determined by genetics, by environment, by the accumulation of cellular damage, by 100 factors that the simple heartbeat metaphor does not capture. but the metaphor persists because it captures something true about the relationship between speed and time. The faster you live, the shorter you live. The slower you live, the longer you last. And there is nothing wrong with living fast. It is what our biology allows. It is what our warm blood demands. But there is something valuable in pausing just for a moment and contemplating the alternative that the cold water offers, the alternative of slowness, of patience, of a body that is built not for the sprint but for the marathon, a marathon measured not in hours but in centuries. We rush through our days. We measure time in hours and minutes and seconds, slicing it thinner and thinner, cramming more and more activity into each shrinking unit. We have invented clocks that count nanoseconds, billionths of a second, fractions of time so small that they have no meaning in the biological world. No organism on Earth operates at the nanosecond scale, yet we build machines that do, and we organize our lives around them. The Greenland shark does not know what a second is. It does not know what a minute is. It drifts through the Arctic dark on a time scale that is closer to the tectonic, the geological, the planetary. A year to the shark is what a day is to us, meaningless in isolation, significant only in accumulation. And the accumulation, over 400 years, is a body 6 meters long and a genome packed with the molecular tools of survival. In a world that is obsessed with speed, with efficiency, with more and faster, and now, the giants of the cold ocean offer a quiet counterpoint. They whisper a different philosophy. Slow down. Conserve. Let the oxygen dissolve. Let the cold do its work. Let the centuries accumulate. There is time. There is always time. The oxygen is dissolving right now. In the Southern Ocean, in the Arctic, in the deep trenches of the Pacific, cold water is absorbing oxygen from the atmosphere, just as it has been doing for billions of years. The engine is still running, the chemistry is still working, and the giants for now are still growing. But the engine is changing, the fuel is shifting, the temperature is rising, degree by fraction of a degree, and the oxygen is leaving, molecule by molecule. We are living in the middle of a slow, planetary experiment, and we do not yet know the outcome. What we know is this: the cold made them large, the oxygen sustained them, the darkness hid them, and the time, the deep, patient, geological time of a planet that has been turning for 4.5 billion years, gave them the space to become what they are, monuments to a different way of being alive. And perhaps that is what the giants teach us most. Not a lesson in biology, though the biology is extraordinary, not a lesson in conservation, though the conservation is urgent, but a lesson in perspective, a lesson in the vast, quiet, indifferent patience of the natural world, a reminder that the universe does not operate on human schedules, that the most impressive things on this planet were not built quickly, they were built slowly, over millions of years in the dark, in the cold, 1 centimeter at a time. This is not a story about urgency, it is a story about time, and time, as the Greenland shark knows, is the one resource that the cold never runs out of. There is a Japanese word, mono no aware, that has no direct translation in English. It means something like the gentle sadness of passing things, the bittersweet awareness that everything is temporary. The cherry blossoms are beautiful because they fall. The sunset is moving because it ends. The beauty is in the transience. But the giants of the cold ocean offer a different kind of beauty. Not the beauty of transience, but the beauty of endurance. The beauty of something that does not rush, does not fade, does not blaze and die. The beauty of something that simply persists, centimetre by centimetre, year by year, century by century, in the dark. There is no word for this in any language I know. Perhaps there should be. The quiet awe you feel when you learn that a living creature has been alive since before your country existed. The vertigo you feel when you realize that the deep ocean operates on a time scale that makes your entire civilization look like a flash of lightning. The humility you feel when you understand that the largest, oldest, most enduring creatures on this planet achieve their greatness not through ambition, or intelligence or speed, but through the simple, elegant physics of cold water and dissolved oxygen. If there is a word for this feeling, it belongs to the ocean. It belongs to the dark, it belongs to the cold. And now, having sat with this feeling, having let it settle into the deeper layers of our consciousness the way marine snow settles onto the abyssal floor, we are ready to return. We have been in the deep for long enough. The cold has taught us what it has to teach. The giants have shown us what they have to show. It is time to rise. This is not the end of the story. It is the middle. And in the middle there is still time to understand, to observe, to protect. The scientists at McMurdo Station are still diving into the freezing water, still collecting sea spiders, still testing the oxygen hypothesis. The satellites are still scanning the ocean surface, measuring temperature and oxygen with each orbit. The fishing vessels in the Southern Ocean are still occasionally hauling up colossal squid, still donating them to science, still providing the rare, precious specimens that allow us to piece together the biology of the giants. The story is not over, and perhaps that is the most important thing to remember as we approach the end of our journey tonight. The giants are not gone. They are not relics. They are alive right now, in the cold darkness beneath the waves, doing what they have done for millions of years, breathing slowly, growing slowly, waiting patiently. And we, up here on the surface, are watching, learning, trying to understand. Now, we have travelled far tonight. We have traced the invisible thread from the chemistry of cold water to the geometry of body size. We have met the giants of the abyss and the giants of the ancient air. We have asked the difficult questions about the future and found that the answers are still forming, still emerging from the data like shapes in the dark water. It is time to return. It is time to leave the deep ocean and the deep past and the deep uncertainty behind. It is time to come back to the surface, to the present, to the warm, safe, dry room where you are listening right now. The ascent is gentle. We rise slowly through the water column, letting the pressure decrease gradually, letting the light return. First the faintest blue glow, then a grey twilight, then the pale shimmer of the surface from below, like a ceiling of liquid silver. Imagine the feeling of rising, the weight of the water above you decreasing with each metre, the darkness fading, the cold retreating. You are in the abyssal zone, 4,000 metres down, where the pressure is 400 times what it is at the surface. You are in the world of the giant isopod, the world of marine snow and endless patience. But now you are ascending, and the world is getting lighter, warmer, softer. At 1,000 metres you pass through the midnight zone. This is where the colossal squid drifts, its enormous eyes scanning the dark. It does not notice you passing. It is focused on something deeper, something you cannot see, a faint bioluminescent spark that might be food or might be nothing. The squid does not rush to investigate. It waits. It has all the time in the world. At 500 metres you enter the twilight zone. Here there is a faint ghostly illumination, not sunlight exactly, but the memory of sunlight, filtered through 1/2 kilometre of water until it is barely a whisper of blue. Jellyfish drift past, their translucent bells pulsing with a slow, rhythmic contraction. They are simple creatures, ancient creatures, older than fish, older than dinosaurs, older than the cold water giants we have been studying. They have been pulsing like this for 500 million years. There is something deeply calming about their motion. It is the oldest heartbeat on the planet. At 200 metres the light begins to strengthen. You can see the green tinge of phytoplankton in the water, the microscopic plants that produce half the oxygen on Earth. They are floating, drifting, photosynthesizing, turning sunlight into breath. The same breath that dissolves in cold water and makes the giants possible. The same breath that is filling your lungs right now. At 50 metres, the world is blue and bright. You can see the surface above you, a shimmering, undulating mirror that separates the world of water from the world of air. It is close now. You can almost touch it. We break through. The air hits us. It is warm. It is 21% oxygen. Enough for a human body, not enough for a Meganeura. The sky is dark. The stars are out. The wind is still. The ocean stretches away in every direction, flat and calm, hiding its giants beneath a surface that gives nothing away. Feel the transition. You were in the deep, in the cold, in the pressure and the darkness. Now you are here, in a room, on a mattress, under a blanket. The temperature is perfect. The pressure is normal. The oxygen is steady. You are a warm-blooded creature, adapted to the surface of the planet, and the surface is where you belong. The giants are not for you. They are for the cold. They are for the dark. They are for the patient, oxygen-saturated silence of the deep. You can visit their world in imagination, but you cannot stay. You are too warm, too fast, too fragile, and that is perfectly fine. The giants do not need you. They have the cold, and the cold is enough. Let the image of the deep ocean settle. Let it become distant, remote, like a dream you had hours ago and can only half remember. The giant isopod on the abyssal floor, motionless, its compound eyes glinting in the dark. The colossal squid drifting in the twilight zone, its tentacles coiled, its hooks retracted, its enormous eyes half closed. The Greenland shark gliding beneath the Arctic ice, blind and patient, its body full of antifreeze, its genome full of repair genes, its cells ticking over at a rate so slow that centuries pass like seasons. They are there, they are real, but they are far, far away, and they are not thinking about you. They are not thinking about anything, at least not in the way you understand thinking. They are simply existing, following the oxygen, following the cold, following the ancient, simple instructions that the ocean wrote into their DNA millions of years before your species took its first breath. What is close is the surface beneath you, the weight of your body pressing down into the bed, the slow, steady rhythm of your breathing, in and out, each breath bringing oxygen into your lungs, dissolving it into your blood, carrying it to every cell in your body. You are doing the same thing the ocean does. You are absorbing oxygen. You are using it to stay alive. The only difference is the temperature and the time. The Greenland shark has been breathing for 400 years. You have been breathing for the length of your life. Both of you are doing the same thing, using the same molecule, sustaining the same spark of life. The shark is just doing it slower, and in the cold water, slower is better, slower is bigger, slower is longer. But here, on the surface, in the warm air of your room, your pace is right. Your metabolism is running at the speed it was designed for. Your heart is beating at the rhythm that your body needs. You are not a cold water creature. You are a creature of the light, of the warmth, of the quick, bright world above the waves. And tonight that world is quiet. Let your breathing slow now, match the rhythm of the deep, slow, regular, predictable, the way the cold water circulates beneath the Antarctic ice, steady and unhurried, carrying oxygen from the pole to abyss, year after year, century after century. There is no urgency in that circulation. There is no deadline. The water moves because the physics tells it to move, and it moves at the pace the physics allows. Let your body follow the same logic. Let it do what it is designed to do. The muscles in your face can relax now. The tension in your shoulders can release. Your hands can unclench. Your feet can go heavy. The bed is holding you the way the ocean holds the shark, supporting your weight, bearing your mass, asking nothing in return. Start with your forehead. Let the skin smooth. Let the furrow between your eyebrows soften. There is nothing to concentrate on now, nothing to figure out. The puzzles of oxygen and temperature and body size are solved, or at least resting, and your mind can rest with them. Let the relaxation spread downward. Your jaw, let it drop slightly. Your tongue can rest against the bottom of your mouth. Your throat can soften. These are muscles that work all day long, talking, swallowing, holding tension you are not even aware of. They can stop now. They can be still. Your shoulders, let them sink. Let them melt into the surface beneath you. They are carrying nothing. There is nothing to hold up, nothing to brace against. The pillars can come down. The weight can transfer to the bed, to the mattress, to the frame, to the floor, to the foundations of the building, to the earth beneath, which has been holding everything up for 4.5 billion years and shows no sign of stopping. Your arms, your hands, let the fingers uncurl, let the palms go soft. These hands, which do so much, which type and grip and gesture and reach, can be still. They are not needed. The giant isopod does not use its claws right now. It is sitting on the abyssal floor, motionless, its appendages folded, its body at rest. Your hands can do the same, your chest, your belly. Let the breath come on its own. You do not need to manage it. The autonomic nervous system, the ancient reliable machinery of your body, will keep breathing for you through the night. It has been doing this since the moment you were born. It will not stop because you stop paying attention. Trust it. Let it work. Your legs, your feet, let them go heavy. Let the blood settle. Let the muscles release their final grip on the day. You are horizontal, which is the body's natural position for repair and recovery. Every cell in your body knows what to do from here. Sleep is not something you achieve. It is something you allow. The room is quiet. The air is still. The light is low or gone entirely. Outside your window, the world is turning, the atmosphere is circulating, the oceans are breathing. Somewhere far to the south, the Southern Ocean is churning around Antarctica, absorbing oxygen, cooling the water, feeding the giants. Somewhere far to the north, the Arctic is dark and frozen, and a Greenland shark is gliding through water that has not seen sunlight in months. These things are happening. They are real. They are occurring at this very moment, as you lie here in the dark. The planet is vast and busy and full of processes that never stop. But they do not need your attention tonight. They do not need your worry. They are operating on a time scale so long that your entire lifetime is a single breath in the rhythm of the deep. The giants are sleeping in the deep, and the deep is sleeping beneath the waves, and the waves are sleeping beneath the stars. Let the science go. Let the numbers and the hypotheses and the Latin names drift away like marine snow, sinking slowly through the water column of your mind, settling gently on the floor of your consciousness where they can rest until morning. You do not need to remember them tonight. They will be here when you wake up, preserved in the papers and the textbooks and the frozen specimens in the museums. Tonight, they are just stories. Quiet stories about cold water and large bodies and the patience of things that live in the dark. You are warm. You are safe. You are on the surface of the planet, held by gravity, held by the mattress, held by the quiet, invisible force that keeps everything in its place. The same gravity that shapes the ocean currents. The same gravity that pulls the marine snow down through the water column. The same gravity that has been holding this planet together for 4.5 billion years. The cold made them large. The oxygen sustained them. The darkness hid them. And you, lying here in the warm light of the land, are the opposite of everything they are. You are small. You are fast. You are bright. And that is the beauty of this planet. It has room for both. Room for the quick and the slow. Room for the warm and the cold. Room for the tiny and the enormous. Room for you, and room for the giants in the deep. The engine is turning, the oxygen is dissolving. The cold water is circling Antarctica, just as it has been doing since before our species existed. And somewhere in that water, something is growing. Slowly, patiently. A centimetre a year, perhaps, or a millimetre, or less. It does not matter. It has time. It has nothing but time. And so do you. You have this night. You have this breath. You have the quiet, steady rhythm of a body at rest, slowing down, letting go, drifting towards sleep the way marine snow drifts toward the ocean floor, slowly, gently, without resistance. The deep is quiet. The surface is still. The giants are far below, breathing through their porous legs, drifting on their ammonium-filled mantles, gliding on their ancient antifreeze-laden bodies. They are not aware of you. They are not aware of anything beyond the cold and the dark and the oxygen in the water, and you are not aware of them. Not really. Not in the way that matters. You are aware only of the bed, of the pillow, of the heaviness of your own body, of the slow, diminishing rhythm of your thoughts, each one quieter than the last, each one sinking a little deeper, settling a little more, coming to rest on the soft floor of sleep. The cold made them large. The warmth makes you drowsy. Both are gifts of the same physics. Both are expressions of the same chemistry. The same oxygen that feeds the giants is feeding your brain right now, keeping the spark of consciousness alive for just a few more moments before it dims and you drift away. The ocean breathes, you breathe. The shark breathes, the squid breathes, the sea spider breathes through its Swiss cheese legs. The planet breathes. Everything is breathing slowly in the dark. Rest now. The giants are sleeping, and so at last are you. Good night.